Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
Get started. I'm here today with Tom Bilyeu, who's been an influence on me. Tom, you didn't know this, but I gave a TEDx talk back in 2014, along with our mutual friend James Altucher, and he was the closing act. I was the opening act, and I had to drop, 5 pounds, and I didn't know how to do it because I've been addicted to eating, sweets and good tasting stuff. And my trainer friends told me, "You got to get this Quest Nutrition. It's like the real deal. It tastes just like a candy bar. It tastes just like a cookie." I want to thank you. Because of you allowed me to drop those 5 pounds. I dropped them from my double chin to my rear end. And I just...
There you go.
No, seriously.
It counts.
You did. You really helped my life. And I made the TED Talk. I cut weight. Those 5 pounds have made a big difference. I want to thank you for that.
That's cool, man. My pleasure. Yeah, when we started, so I come from a morbidly obese family. Yeah. So, that was, at least for me, that was the whole idea, was giving food that people could choose based on taste. And it happened to be good for them.
Yeah.
But that you didn't have to ask them to go out of their way. It was like, we really wanted it to taste like cookies, candy, pie, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and the ultimate goal, the ultimate validation of it is my kids will eat that rather than, some Oreo or something like that.
Yeah. We used to have a lot of people report that, which is tough.
Yeah. So I wanted to start with actually going further in that vein. I heard interviews with you from years back just about that process or what your intent was, not in the chemical, laboratories and the particle accelerators, et cetera, but to make something healthy, to make something that had mimicked certain properties that were delicious, because that is the best way to incentivize good behavior. I viewed that as a very scientific quest, no pun intended. I want to talk about the scientific method, how you approach things analytically, and what your rubric is. How do you make decisions like this? We're going to get into this, then we're going to pivot, and we're going to become entertainment, then we're going to pivot, and we're going to get into NFTs, founders' keys, stuff like that we'll get into. How do you know when you can make a pivot? Is there a rubric? Is there a checklist? How do you go through these?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So I created this thing I call the physics of progress. You're the right person to have this conversation with. And so because I'm trying to navigate my own life, so I never would have stepped in front of the camera if I wasn't running businesses. Because for me, that's I need to be checking that this stuff really works. I need to be using it on a daily basis. And then, I'll look into a camera and say, here's what I'm doing and these are the results. And finding to try to explain to somebody how you get good at business, because I'd often say things like, hey, fill your heart with love, think of the community and all that. But, by the way, you also have to be business savvy, because there's a bunch of people out there that have good intentions, but they can't grow a company. Yeah. So I was like, what is business savvy? How do you explain that? And so I start breaking this down. Okay, what do I do? And I'm like, all right, well, I start with my goal. I know what I'm trying to do. And then once I have my goal, I just identify I'm here and my goal is there, and what stands between me and that is essentially entropy. Everything's moving towards chaos. So I have to inject all this energy into this closed system in order to create order. But you have to do it in a really specific way, and that specific way is understanding the obstacle that stands between you and where you want to go. And then you basically create a test, you have a hypothesis and then a test that you're going to run to see if it works. You run it, you learn, and then you repeat. And so I break this whole thing down, and I'm like, it's the physics of progress. And one of the guys on my team was like, that's the scientific method.
Yes.
And I was like, what? He's like, look it up. And so I look it up. I'm like, oh my God, this is literally the scientific method, recontextualized for business. And what I love, and people talk about this in science a lot, when people rediscover the same thing from different angles, you're onto something fundamental.
Yes.
And truly, everything has a physics of, right? There's a point at which you're no longer at analogy, you're at first principles, and you're just thinking from there. And so business is no different. You need to get down to what is the actual nature of the problem that you face. And when you get to the nature of the problem, then you can build up. So I do this thing called business decision making, where people that have, thriving businesses come, and it's like, give me your hardest problem, and you'll see, without me knowing your industry, I can help you find the answer very quickly, because you're getting to first principles. What's your goal? Where are you? What is the thing creating the problem? And then how do we come up with our best guess, hypothesis, on the most efficient way to solve that problem? And then if we've thought through that well, we run that. We will fail to some degree, and then we try again. And so what's really interesting about that process is people think that it's going to be complicated. They think what they need is my 20 years of business. What they actually need is first principles thinking. And the second you get to first principles, you can now solve these problems. It's iterative, of course, but you can now solve the problem.
Do you think it can work in reverse, almost because of the curse of knowledge? Like I mentioned before we started filming, that most of my friends that teach economics or teach at business schools or whatever, they're not super successful financially. Not that that's the only metric for apprising success. Obviously, they're incredibly intellectual, but most people that win the Nobel Prize in economics, for example, they're not billionaires, right? They're not in practical terms. And you would think they know the base layer, as you call it, the zero first principles. They know that better than anybody. Is there such a thing that's holding them back? Perhaps this curse of knowledge, like they know it, but they can't teach it because they're too far away from being at the beginner's mind perspective? Or
that's really interesting. So we could rabbit hole on keeping a beginner's mind, which is more important than people realize, and I think is the reason that generations end up thinking they're at war with each other, but they're not actually at war. It's just that people tend to calcify into dogma, and so it's open-minded versus like calcified, and then that's why this generation then will calcify and the next generation will be open-minded. But it's really, if you can keep an open mind, I don't think you find the conflict between the generations.
Interesting.
But getting into why those people aren't successful specifically, one is they're following their passion. And so they're super into something. They're in this feedback loop that to me is very much like love. Love is only what I'll call real love when it's reciprocated. So you get into a feedback loop where I feel this thing, you feel that thing.
It's a flywheel.
Yeah, and it's like, oh my God, you're making me feel better. I'm making you feel better. And like you get in this really cool loop. If you're developing a skill and you're getting good at it, and let's say that they're in intellectual circles or they're teaching or whatever, and so they get into that flywheel around the education portion. So what they're actually getting good at is teaching that thing versus doing that thing. Now they could flip it and decide I'm going to go get good at that thing instead of getting good at teaching it. But what you'll find is there are certain personality types or personality elements that are necessary to be successful in business. And the one that takes everybody by surprise, you must be able to self-soothe. And if you can't self-soothe, you'll never win as an entrepreneur because you're thrown into an environment. Not only is the market full of chaos, but the amount that you can do as one person is so tiny that now you've got to get a whole large group of people to galvanize around an idea and a direction, get all of them pointed in the same way and moving at speed. Then it's all going to break down because one day somebody's dog is going to have been hit by a car that day. Their kid is having a fit.
COVID's going to happen.
COVID happens. And so now all of a sudden you're like, wait, all I want to do is economics. Like when I read the books, I'm on fire. I feel the way that I want to feel. But when I'm dealing with HR, I don't feel the way that I want to feel. And so 1,000 little moments like that led them to they kept hitting a barrier and finding, when I'm teaching it, when I'm reading about it, when I'm studying it, when I'm alone with the idea, I'm in the loop that I want to be in. And then when I try to organize other people and like even dealing with the administration, or maybe they don't even understand business, or they have, like some people have conflicted ideas around business. And so it's just enough of those little nudges away from one side and towards another that they get really good at one thing and it doesn't monetize well.
Right. Yeah, and if you look at it, I know you've talked a lot about this in the past, but kind of the inspiration as Simon Sinek said, finding your why or whatever. It's easy to optimize for that in economic terms with money, or in influence in science. We have citation counts. That's our metric. That's our lucre. What is to you the purpose of wealth? Because obviously you're optimizing for financial success, but for impact as well. What is the purpose of this? I've had billionaires on. I've been fortunate to have billionaires on the podcast. Everyone gives a different answer, which is not the same as like a scientist. You get 5 scientists. I want to understand how quarks work. I want to understand how the cosmos came to be. I want to understand the DNA replication. But what is the purpose of wealth, at least as you see it, Tom?
To me, it's all about what are you trying to build. So I very fortunately learned truly in a visceral sense that money can't buy happiness very early. And I'll make that more specific. Money doesn't influence your neurochemistry the way that you want it to. So what happens is, at least if you grew up like I grew up, sort of middle to lower middle class, you looked at wealthy people, especially in the 80s when it was like that was celebrated and amazing. And every John Hughes film was set in a neighborhood in Chicago that I wanted to live in. And, I looked at that and thought they were cool and amazing, and it was everything that I ever wanted. And, so I had this sense of like, they're cool, I'm sort of lame, I want to be that. Yeah. And so if I get rich, I will feel about myself the way that I feel about them now. Mm-hmm. And money can't do that. So money won't help you. So whatever insecurity you have, whatever thing about yourself that you don't like, all of that's going to follow you. Mm-hmm. And so I can make you as rich as humanly possible, and it can't touch that part. And unfortunately, maybe fortunately, in fact, fortunately, the only thing that really matters in life is how you feel about yourself when you're by yourself. And you don't need to be wealthy to feel good about who you are. And there's a whole formula that I have for that. Right. But when I think about then, why then do people keep chasing money? Because even I'm still chasing money. Yeah. And if I know that that's not true, and I've spent a whole lot of energy in my life making sure that I do feel good about myself when I'm by myself, then why do things with revenue in mind? And the answer is because it lets you build. And if it is true that money at its very nature, and this is an idea I'm obsessed with, don't think about things, think about the nature of things. Once you start thinking about what the nature of money is, now you understand why people chase it. So it's not going to help you feel better about yourself, but it is a way to basically capture your time and energy and carry it across time without devaluing it. Yeah. And so now it's like, whoa, you're saying that right now I can spend my time in a way that can result in something that I can take with me across time and space. That's the only thing that you can do that carries forward like that. Mm-hmm. Every other use of your time, it terminates then and there. Maybe you have a memory, like if it's an experience or something like that, and that's useful to be sure, but even those tend to degrade over time. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you can get good at investing in a way that the economics are captured and preserved, what's really being captured is the time and the energy. Mm-hmm. And so now you can essentially aggregate all that fruitful time and energy, and now you can point it at something. And the reason that matters is when you take diffuse energy, right? I have however much time I have left in my life, but it's sort of evenly spread out, the energy that I can use. Mm-hmm. But if I can capture it in the form of money, now I've got a magnifying glass. And now I can build something. I can aim that magnifying glass and actually change the world. Yep. And so you think of a magnifying glass turns this diffuse, radiation from the sun into something.
Entropy.
Exactly.
Yes.
And it will light shit on fire. Mm-hmm. And so that's exactly what people can do with their time and energy by turning it into money first. Mm-hmm. Then you can concentrate it and you can create something absolutely spectacular. Mm-hmm. And so once people understand that's the nature of money, that's the nature of work, now you don't expect it to be something that it's not, which is it's not going to make me feel better about myself, but it is going to allow me to build something. So if I can build something that makes me feel better about myself, now you get into this loop. So like my mission is to make sure that nobody gets to the age of 15 without encountering a growth mindset. Makes me feel like I matter, gives me meaning and purpose, but I need money to do it. And so I've been very thoughtful in my life about doing things that allow me to capture that energy.
I want to ask you, and feel free, we can always cut this out, but you made a conscious decision, if I remember correctly, not to have children. And I always say, people are greedy because they want to teleport, they want to live forever, and they want to take their money with them, they want to take their houses with them. And I said, you can teleport, Tom. You can actually, there's a physicist telling you can teleport. You just can't go. In other words, you can teleport your values, your mindset, your philosophy, even your DNA, if that matters to you. And I'm less of a fan of like how important DNA and blood matters. But with a child, and I'm blessed to have children, I feel like
children, by the way.
Yeah, right. But I'm blessed to at least make this teleportation of me and my wife and our values into the future. And I'm curious, and again, it's not something you want to talk about. We can cut it out.
No, I love it. Let's fucking go. Ask me the hard questions. I'm about it.
I feel like you have so much impact on so many people around the world, but there is a difference. And I don't just mean biological kids. Some people can't have kids. A lot of, ideological kids. You're making a lot of. What was that choice like? Why was it consciously done in a way that I feel like if you have a stake in the future, as you do clearly. Oftentimes you want to incentivize that by your own children or by ideological children. So why was that? I don't mean to ask prior or anything, but why was it a conscious decision not to have children, as I understand it, unless I'm...
No. Yeah. You're right on the money. Okay, I'm so not sensitive about this, so you can ask it as hard as you want.
Okay, fine.
So the way that I see it is this. I really want kids. Like, I really want kids. I could write you a poem about the transformational nature of that, that would convince you that I had kids, because I really understand what that's about. Partly because I big brothered for a kid for 8.5 years, and I see how they become like this thing that you care about and you love and you want to protect. And so, like, I get it. The only thing I want more than I want to have kids is to not have kids. And so it was this like, oh man, of because I will regret not having children when I'm old. Like, I'm so aware of that. And so my thing is go into every decision with your eyes wide open, understand everything is a trade-off. So Thomas Sowell, I think, is a brilliant economist. And he says, there's no utopia, people.
There's no free lunch.
There is just trade-offs.
That's right.
And so to have children would be this beautiful trade-off. And I would get something absolutely extraordinary in terms of the upside. But the life that I've worked so hard to construct for myself is so joyful and full of fulfillment that I was like, I'm trading a known for an unknown. And it may be better, and I may do it and go, oh my God, of course. Like, how could I have ever thought that I didn't want to do this? And I got a piece of advice, and it really, and I remember when he said it to me, I said, this is the best advice I'm ever going to get on having kids. Entrepreneur, successful guy, and I was really debating it. And I was like, look, I love building so much. I don't want anything to pull me away from that. And I'm like really concerned. Yeah. So what do I do? Have kids, not have kids? He goes, Tom, have kids, don't have kids. It doesn't matter. But whatever you do it all the way. And I was like, whoa, that is really good advice. And so I just decided that I never wanted to have something that made me feel guilty that I was at work. And I thought, I already know, like, I have 2 little dogs. And if I work too much, I start feeling bad because of the dogs. And I just know myself well enough. I feel a tremendous sense of obligation to help and to do better. And if I have kids, I wouldn't be able to build the business the way that I want to. And that's a trade-off. And I will miss out on a huge part of the human experience by making that choice. But I also capture something that people with kids won't be able to do, which is to be unconflicted about that thing that you're doing, and that there is nothing, because I'm building the company with my wife. So it's like, the more I invest in my marriage, the more I can invest in the company. And I don't have anything that's, sort of calling me or wanting me home. And to make matters worse, I'm very close with my extended family. So all of that sense of connection and camaraderie and love and joy that comes from the familial environment, I get from them. But as they die off, I really am going to say, fuck, I gave up a lot to do all of those things. And in that, and I've tried to run the thought experiment of whether it will be cold comfort to me that I have built these things and all of that. And I come to one inescapable truth about the human condition. The only thing that matters is your frame of reference. And so if in that moment I say, you sacrificed like an idiot, you gave up, you could have children at your bedside right now, taking care of you, loving you, and you sold that out for what? For a company? To help strangers halfway around the world? For money? I'm disgusted. What were you thinking? And if that's my frame of reference, it will be devastating emotionally, and I will be ruined. But what I know is that I don't need to choose that frame of reference. And the other frame of reference is to say, you built something that mattered, and it impacted people's lives, and you optimized for joy while you were doing it. That the pursuit of that thing gave you so much that there were days where you were giddy, looking around like, this fight that I'm doing to build this company, win or lose, has been the most fun I've ever had in my life. And you really tried to maximize your potential and to be fulfilled, to matter, to do things that help. And that was awesome. And so if now you wish that you had had kids, mourn that, do whatever you need. But don't lose sight of what you were really doing and what the frame of reference was that got you here. And I find any decision in your life, you can just flip your frame of reference. It's the same truth, but you look at it from one angle and it feels terrible. you look at it from another angle and suddenly you're like, wow, that actually feels amazing. So I am very thoughtful about how I frame the things in my life, especially the things I can't change.
It wasn't just, we're frivolous and we won't be able to take as many trips to Europe. That's certainly true, although not too many people are, taking world trips right now, right? So what do you think is the most misunderstood thing about either you or business? And in other words, there are concepts that are misunderstood by the general public. Entropy, we talked about that. Maybe we'll talk a little bit more. I mean, one of my favorite things to think about is if I ask you, Tom, like, how can I make your life twice as good right now? Like, if I give you, twice as much money, does it make your life twice as good? Not really. I mean, you can only water ski behind one yacht at a time, right?
Not how I spend my money, but yes, because I go immediately to how much faster could I build, and would that really help? But yeah.
But then if I ask you, how can I make your life half as good? There are an infinite number of ways, right?
That
Especially
would be
if you have
very easy.
Your dog, whatever. With kids, it's even more so. So people kind of neglect that optionality, that there is this network effect, there is this entropic, dependency, and there's more availability of states that your life could be worse than it could be better.
That's really interesting.
And for that reason, which is the definition of entropy, it's disorder to order, and then it's much harder to get ordered. And focusing the light, like you said before, it's organizing energy. The sun puts out a lot of energy, but it's not as well organized until we use it on Earth. So I want to ask you, what is the most misunderstood part about you, your life, the businesses that you make? What seems easy to people is really hard. What's really hard that seems easy? How do you like parcel out? Because you only have this limited resource of time, although I want to get into other aspects that are limited in my opinion. But how do you allocate resources to direct them entropically to focus into the sunlight beam of laser intensity that you do so exquisitely well?
Well, so in terms of what do people misunderstand, I don't know. I don't spend a lot of time. I just don't get that feedback. It's not like I'm doing some heroic thing to avoid it or anything. I haven't got a lot of feedback. But in terms of what people misunderstand about business, it's really emotional regulation. And so I've seen a lot of people that were far smarter than I. They either don't have the stamina, or they can't deal with the emotional pain of failure. And because to learn you must fail, if you can't reorient yourself to not worrying about that, you're never going to make it. So that's the part in business I'm always trying to get people, or about me, that I'm trying to get people to understand. I am not smarter than the average person. I'm not a fast thinker. I am a obsessive thinker, so I end up thinking deeply about things, but I'm not a fast thinker. But despite that, I've been able to put together a useful set of ideas and skills that allow me to move forward, because I can emotionally regulate myself, deal with failures, and then let the knowledge from the failures stack. That's like my real superpower. Now, how do I allocate the resources? That everything is goal driven. Like, what is your goal? This is the thing that the number of people that come up to me, usually as an entrepreneur, and they're like, all right, Tom, I'm really struggling. Like, what's the key? And I'm like, don't say a word. I'm going to make a prediction. I'm going to ask you what your goal is. And you're going to tell me you know exactly what it is. Then you're going to say it out loud. And it's going to be really vague. And they're like, no, I got it. And so then I ask, cool, what's your goal? I want to win a gold medal. And I'm like, amazing. In what? The Olympics?
Right.
Yes, the Olympics. Fantastic. Summer or winter? Summer. Great. Swimming or tennis? Swimming? Fantastic. Backstroke, freestyle medley, like, what are we doing? People think they're clear because they have that like initial sort of ballpark thing that they want to do.
Passion, right?
Yeah. And the answer people actually give when I say, okay, what's your goal? I want to help people.
Right.
It's not a business,
I want to be
right?
famous, right?
It's so vague. So like, you have to get laser targeted. What, by when, and how much? Like, when you get that focused on what it is that you're trying to do,
like metrics.
Then we can back into the next 15 minutes, because you know where you want to be, you know where you are. And so if you can get good at identifying that gap, the entropic principle, the thing that's the problem, then we can start figuring out what our proposed solution is. Once we think we know our proposed solution to the problem that stands between us and our goal, now I know what to do in the next 15 minutes. I know whether I need a racket or a swimming pool. And until you get that kind of clarity on what it is you need to become the best in the world at in order to achieve your goal, you can't move forward. And so allocating my energies is always around first principles thinking, around that scientific loop that we talked about, knowing where I'm trying to get to.
And I want to pivot a little bit because I see you pivoting so much in life, and it's so commendable. Because I think, one of the lessons I've gotten from interviewing 10 Nobel Prize winners to date is that when they get bored of something, when they're not having fun, that's the key moment. That's the question. They say about marriages. If a psychologist is interviewing somebody, a couple, and they're having a problem, if one of them like rolls their eyes or something, that person, they're going to get divorced. Like, it's just a 99% correlation. When you're not having fun as a scientist, which you normally don't think of it, you think about very bookish and studious, but it's actually really fun. And it's very creative, which people don't often appreciate as well. What is your rubric? Again, you're a metrics-focused guy. So what do you prize as metric? Obviously, business has a metric; it's built in. But I see your kind of killer app or your secret power, superpower is actually your podcast, your interviews, the conversations that you have, the deep dives that you take. Both you and you used to do it live, and now you're doing it here. How do you know when you're doing well as an interviewer? What is going on in your mind? What app? Because I know you've got an app running in your back. Like, I'm doing good, I'm doing bad. Like, I'm sitting here, you're telling me about the optionality that you decided with not having kids, and I'm like, that's kind of giving me chills. Like, that's really cool. At least he's thought about it. He's not some selfish, self-absorbed guy. But how do you know when you're interviewing somebody? Like, give us that app that's running in your mind, because you're obviously very.
I have two different interview styles, so it partly depends on which interview I'm running. If I'm doing you just wrote a book, and I'm trying to help you give the best interview you're ever going to give to distill the book, then it's like I map it out beforehand, and I'm like, how close are we getting to stringing together the best answers they've ever given to these questions into one nice, concise package?
Not like the first time they ever told the secret, but the best time. The best.
Yeah.
Okay,
so I find their loop, and then I help distill their loop down, and then hopefully have tangents that I want to go into that really clarify and are fresh. And so that's interview style number one. Interview style number two is that they're on a topic that I'm so fascinated by. I know the interview's going well when I completely forget that I'm interviewing them, and I'm just locked in. And this was, so about 2 years ago now, I pulled my team aside and I said, look, I'm not having fun anymore, and I'm doing the same interview over and over and over, and it's not interesting to me. And so we're going to need to broaden the type of interview that I can do. And what was happening was I was interviewing mindset people, and it was getting to the point where I could give a better mindset interview answer than they could. And so I was like, this isn't fun anymore. Yeah. And to expand it, there needed to be some niche, like what's going to be that thing. And so the idea was, okay, well, I'm building a mindset so I can deploy it against something. And so now I'm going to start bringing people on that I'm just fascinated by, that are, whether it's a neuroscientist or an astrophysicist, people that, and I'm like, look, the audience, we didn't build that audience. Right. So it's going to be we're going to go through the desert for a while, and we will come out the other side, because eventually we will gather a different crowd. But it was 2 years of our growth is really slowed down. But now, as it clicks over and we built this other community, it's like we're demolishing our all-time records and just going crazy. But you really, to bring it back to your initial question, you have to know what you're trying to deliver to the audience to know the metric by which to judge it.
And do you find that things that seemed ancillary or maybe unrelated, I call it for you your forklift moment, things that you would have never thought would come into play in a business, and then, okay, I know how to drive a forklift, and that's going to save my ass one day. But are there things serendipitously that you kind of quote unquote count on and that contributes to your success, or is it more methodical? Because I see this paradox in you. It's methodical and also very, very kind of not carefree, but just open to serendipity.
Yes, and now I'm going to say, it's not a quote, but an idea that you'll actually be able to tell me if this is real, because I've quoted this so many times, and every time I'm like, I'm pretty sure I remember this right, that most Nobel Prizes are awarded where two areas overlap. So it's like chemistry and physics or whatever. And so,
like Rosalind Franklin discovered DNA. She was a physicist. They won it for medicine. Totally correct. Yeah.
All right. I'm very happy to hear that that's real. Yeah. Now, that I think is the reason I've been successful the way that I have. So
the synergy.
Because what ends up happening, my perfect example is, so almost every 10 years, I've ended up disrupting myself and moving into something completely different. So I start in filmmaking, then I go to technology, software, security software of all things. Then I go into nutrition, no software, nothing to do with filmmaking, nothing, and now into media. So at Quest, what helped was, well, I was a filmmaker before. And so I built out a whole studio inside of a protein bar company, and social media ends up becoming our thing. It wasn't even called social media back then. So it was like nobody was doing it, but because I was a filmmaker by trade, it made sense to me. And so we were creating content as a company before other companies were doing it. Ends up being one of the things that helps us blow up. Now you move into media, start a comic book division at Impact Theory, go into it, and as soon as I see the distribution model, I'm like, wait, I just came from nutrition where we're distributing to 90,000 points of distribution. I've got down to the shelf, like what's moving, how many units I have. Yeah, I mean, it's like you're getting real-time data, and because of that, I can do marketing in specific regions and not others, and I know what flavors work where. And so it's like with that data, I can steer the company.
Yes.
But in comics, it's like from the 90s, I'm not kidding, one distributor, it was a joke. And so I'm like, guys, you can't do this. And so we got on a call with them, and I'm like, hey, we need this data, this data, this data. And they're like, we're not going to supply that. So I'm like, well, then we're not going to print comics anymore. Like, it was so self-evident. I'm like looking around at all the other comic distributors. I'm like, guys, you can't put up with this. Like, this is insane. And so we immediately pivoted hard to going pure digital. And so then literally we hard pivot pure digital, COVID hits. Now the comic world is like imploding because none of them are digital. We're popping off because we've gone digital. And it's like, I never would have moved that quickly if I didn't have the experience from being in the nutrition industry. So it's like you end up going, whoa, like this thing that I never would have realized, the driving the forklift, for people that don't know that story. My dad forcing me to work in a paint factory as a kid, learning I had to get certified to drive forklift, and angry at my dad, like thinking this is the dumbest thing ever. I'm like, why are you making me do this? But in the Bilyeu household, every summer you had to have a job. And so, I ended up paint factories, paint warehouses, because my dad worked for a paint company. And then flash forward 15, 17, maybe even 20 years later, I don't remember how long, and the equipment shows up at Quest. And we look around and we're like, how are we getting it off the semi? Like, what have we done? We've just taken delivery of like hundreds of thousands of dollars of equipment, and a big semi truck backs up, and there's no way to get it off the truck and into the warehouse. And my partner's like looking around and, oh my God, if only we knew how to drive forklift. And I'm like, guys, I actually do know how to drive a forklift. And so got the forklift from a neighbor in the complex, unloaded everything, and I literally looked into a camera and was like, Dad, wax on, wax off, man. It's crazy.
That's awesome.
And so, skill acquisition is the name of the game. You never know when you're going to need something. Look, be intentional about the skills that you acquire, but don't be afraid to reinvent, because it does end up coming back in some way.
And going back to your Olympics analogy, I feel like the most successful people are like the biathletes. Like, they're not the best skiers, they're not the best shooters, but they're the best guys who can ski and shoot at the same time and maximize that vector, that projection into that space. I want to pivot in the last few minutes to my standard 3 questions I ask all my guests. But before we do, I want to talk about NFTs, because you've obviously gotten really interested in it. First of all, I remember you saying like your goal is to become Disney 2.0, 3.0, whatever. Now you're obviously incredibly invested in terms of your intellectual capital into NFTs and so forth. Those on the surface, I mean, there's comics and so forth, but those on the surface don't appear to be completely co-aligned. If I'm your career coach, like, can you explain to me, how do those dovetail together, or do they not have to?
No, they do. Okay. Dude, okay, so I'm obsessed. I hope we got a little bit of time
of
here.
Course,
so,
as much as you have.
I have a whole strategy. So when we started Impact Theory, I said to the team, our job is to stay in business long enough to find our moment of disruption. And I didn't know what it was going to be. I could not have predicted that it would end up being NFTs. But as an entrepreneur, you have to look for cultural energy. And there's been something really weird happening in the culture that I round to, and I don't know how you feel about swearing on the show. I've done it a couple times already, but you can beep it out. That's what I call, there's fuck you, fuck the man energy building up. And,
authoritarian.
So I'm watching this and I'm like, oh, there's something going on. Like, there's all this friction between the generations. Like, what is this? And I'm beginning to realize that when you look at tectonic plates, there's all this pressure building up. Oh my God, you actually know the person. So Eric Weinstein says somewhere, I don't remember where I heard it, I don't think he said it to me, but he said the generations the part of all this friction is that the old generation isn't passing the baton to the new generation.
That's right.
And I remember when he said it, he is one of the smartest people on the planet. I sit at his feet constantly. But it's the one thing he's ever said where I thought, no one ever hands off the baton.
Yeah.
It's just that historically, physicality was such a part of our day-to-day life that the old generation couldn't hold on to power. They were just outperformed by young people. Right. But now everything is becoming information, and therefore experience is more useful than youth, vigor, and physical strength.
I say wisdom is more important than knowledge.
Exactly. Right. Well said. So they're able to cling to power in a way that previous generations couldn't. And so you're getting all this friction building up between the generations. And the housing bubble happens, bursts. Satoshi writes a white paper, creates fuck you man money. And so no one's ever going to lord this over us again. We understand this decentralized movement, and we're going to do this whole thing. And so here I am going, okay, I've got this huge incumbent in Disney that has done an extraordinary job. I am in nothing but awe of my competition. What they've done is absolutely breathtaking. And I'm looking at it going, okay, they've got a 90-year head start. They've got billions of dollars in IP and billions of dollars in revenue. How am I ever going to...
Brand and awareness.
Exactly. How am I ever going to really have my moment? Then I start looking at the blockchain. I see what's happening there. Somebody introduces me to the idea of digital scarcity 6 years ago. And I remember seeing it going, that's going to change my business forever. But then promptly forgot about it because the tech wasn't there yet. And as it goes, people start creating all this incredible infrastructure. And then about 8 months as of when we're recording this ago, somebody says the letters NFT in a string to me for the first time. And I, within 72 hours, have allocated millions of dollars in capital because I realized one thing that NFTs does that gives me what I need in order to actually take on Disney. And that is going back to that, in fact, the magnifying analogy I got from thinking about why NFTs are changing the world. Because it isn't that they're collectibles. That's cool, and that's a part of what makes it work. It's not even the technology, which the technology is so important. And to think from first principles, you have to understand it. But that technology allows for companies now to really harness in an efficient way the energy of a community, which has not yet been possible. So what it's opened is this ability, all that fuck you to the man energy that's pent up, you're able to take a distributed mentality and say, hey, what I'm going to do, I'm going to create products, but I'm going to let you as the community capture the long tail value of that. Now, the second that became technologically possible for the audience to capture 90% of the long tail value of the products that they help promote, you just changed everything. Why? Because the current incumbent companies will not be able to make the mental switch. This is exactly how incumbents get disrupted. Every time they calcify into dogma and they end up getting disrupted by somebody who just has come up in a new world. It's so fun having a scientist, so I can use all these quotes. Max Planck, right? Science does not advance one insight at a time. It advances one funeral at a time. Why? Because people cannot let go of these ideas that worked. They worked. You built a career on them.
Kodak did great, right?
But you can't do it when you see the digital camera, even though you invent it. So it becomes this whole quagmire. So now you get a company like me, all I'm looking for is a moment of disruption. And you're telling me all I have to do is give up a ton of revenue? No problem. Because what I actually need is the magnifying glass. I don't actually need that much revenue. It's very easy to give that away in the short term because it comes back in the long term. So imagine, I'm not trying to build the next Netflix right now. That's a distribution platform. Oh God, the thought of trying to build that, no way. That's unimaginable amounts of capital to try and build. Not going to do that, but I can build something on the back of NFTs that allows me to just get my community absolutely fever pitched because they know. So we have a product coming up called Merry Mods. It's a story. We want to turn it into a franchise, but we're making an NFT of it first, which they can then buy. And then if I actually pull off turning that into a franchise, that collectible ends up having real value. And so you create an incentive in the audience because they're going to, on the secondary market, we'll take a very small amount. They'll capture the absolute lion's share of that. And now, if I go to Netflix and say, hey guys, all you holders of the Merry Mods project, we're going to be pitching Netflix. I want you to stand in the parking lot with a sign that says, I'll watch Merry Mods. right? And if I can get, and that's a bit tongue-in-cheek, but if I can get 5,000 people to activate, to show up, to call in, to whatever, then it's a very different negotiation. And so I learned an immutable truth at Quest, which is whoever's closest to the audience controls the negotiation. And if you've added value to the audience's life and then asked them to do something that's sort of low effort for them, but huge impact for you, they'll do it. It's absolutely incredible. And the blockchain is what unlocks my ability to capture that energy by giving them products that they capture the value of. And it's just like, I say this to as many entrepreneurs as I can, as fast as I can, about how they've got to switch the way they think. You need an NFT strategy. This is about activating your community and letting them participate in the growth of the companies and products that they help support. It's never existed before.
So I want to, start to wrap up with that concept, but now apply to science, my domain. So it used to be that, professors would get, decent salary. I'm a public, employee of the state of California, but I have freedom. I had academic freedom. I had none of the I had all the upside in the past, but none of the administrative, bureaucratic, all the different hurdles and sort of legal compliance that I have to go through every single day that I have almost no time to teach. By the way, they never taught me how to teach. I had to learn that myself on my own. And then, but also I'm expected to do research, and I'm not making as much money as I could. And I see my students that go to Google and Apple and come here or something like that. They're making twice the salary of a public employee. So I'm asking, on behalf of other scientists, is there a strategy, or where you could see it from the creator side? You talked about from the broader platform side of how they could be participant beneficiary owners of this intellectual property, but somebody has to create. Now in science, you'd like to think, science belongs to the public, and it does if the public pays your salary, pays for my research grants, pays for my graduate students. But what if they don't? I guess I worry about a slightly dystopian phenomenon, and I'm hoping that you'll disabuse me of that notion, which is that if we NFTIs, Andrew Huberman, who was on your podcast recently, saying, this is great, we're going to look for, first microscope picture of this, this gene, this I actually found it very scary, because privatizing science is antithetical to what I think of as science. I actually find that very frightening. And so I'm worried that could we become a victim of the success and the scalability that you evangelize so successfully if NFTs go into science? In other words, I get the case for business, for profit, whatever. Science, I would like to think, is for the public, but along those lines, we also, don't do a great job selling it to the public. I mean, a scientist, they say, is outgoing if he looks at your shoes when he talks to you, right? So we have a great script, and we're terrible actors.
That's amazing.
Are you worried about, kind of like Ice Nine phenomena, where it's just going to go across the world? And
what
now,
a great reference.
Yeah. So.
I am not, so I will disabuse you of that. You're going to see a wonderful future. Look, let's always remember Thomas Sowell is correct. Yes. Everything is a trade-off.
Right.
But here's how it will actually play out. So the big concern, the sort of irony of ironies, the big criticism of NFTs is, why would I ever pay money for something that's available to everybody?
Yeah.
So they're going to remain available to everybody for a couple reasons. One, it's the same reason when somebody buys art, the vast majority of people want to put it somewhere people can see it. Right. And the adoption of art in NFTs is 100 times, 1,000 times more than art that's going to hang in your house. Right. Why? Because you can flex it. Now, there's this idea of the God neuron, right? That some people just have a neuron in their brain that makes them much more responsive to religious experience. And so they have this sense of awe and wonder, and so they can't fathom how somebody could not believe in God. I think there's also what I'll call an ownership neuron, where there are just some people, they just want to own it. Even if it's a star in the sky and everyone gets to look at it.
That's true.
To them, it just matters. It means something to own. Now, I happen to have that neuron. So I'm like, yo, that's mine. I own it. That's in my wallet. Right. Now, there's a whole side to NFTs where there's, the way you have to think of NFTs, it's NFTs with matrix code hiding inside of it.
Right. It's not like putting it in a free port in the Bahamas and you never see it.
You can't see the code, but it's there.
Yeah.
And so I can imbue it with utility.
Yeah.
So it isn't just that, you are the, like, I saw this meme that was like, I get NFTs now. If I own it, I'm the only one that's allowed to pretend that I actually own it. And when you don't understand metadata, that's what it seems like. But for instance, we did a project called the Impact Theory Founders Key.
Yes.
If you have one of the keys, anybody could go screen grab it, and now they have your exact pixel perfect copy of your key. But if you show up to one of my live events and try to get in, I'm going to scan it, and I'm going to see that you don't have metadata, and that it's not actually yours. So
it's imbued with a intelligence feature that
absolutely
is not repeatable, not replaceable, not breakable. Yeah,
exactly. So what I think is going to happen in science, it will be something like, this is the first photo of whatever gene, whatever breakthrough star of a nebula or whatever, and the people that want to own it are now going to be able to own it. And then when it's a real moment, like that becomes culturally significant. Think about NBA Top Shot. So NBA Top Shot's done hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue selling moments that just the night before were free.
Right.
Anybody can watch.
Tape it.
Anybody can watch now. Go on YouTube and see it.
Yeah.
But people still want to own it.
Right.
And so now when science finally has this moment where somebody like you or Huberman or whoever can say, hey, public, here is this new discovery for everybody to see. Look at it. Take it. And by the way, we've got the NFT.
Right.
Now, they're more incentivized than ever to make sure that the whole world knows about that. Why? Because it makes the NFT more valuable.
Right.
So now the more famous they can make the information, the more famous they can say, this moment really matters, it leads to this, and look, people go take the information, and people are like, oh my God, this leads to this breakthrough, that breakthrough, it's all this stuff is happening because this person shared it with the world. That NFT skyrockets in value in a community that cares about science and cares about NFTs. When I say that over the next, 20 years, billions of dollars will be generated. I mean, billions of dollars, $3.8 billion were generated in NFTs in August of 2021 alone. So I'll say over the next 20, 25 years, there will be billions of dollars in educational, scientific things that people are going to create in NFTs that the market will say this was a relevant enough moment and a scarce enough supply that this matters, and then most of that value will be transacted on the secondary market. So the community gets to capture that value. We talked about how important that is. But
it
you can get
to the benefit of the creator,
for several reasons. One, they'll get a royalty if they're smart. They don't have to, but that will certainly help fund more science and all of that. But also, they become known as the person that did that. The NFT matters. They become sort of celebrities within that culture, which gets them more attention. And trust me, attention opens doors, and it just becomes this incredible loop.
Yeah. And the last thing I'll say about that, I also think there's a parallel kind of metaverse with blockchain in general, that you could have things which are scarce in science, like proof of discovery. I discovered that the universe is expanding at an accelerating rate. Well, that's pretty darn cool, but I'm not ready. I have to validate it, verify it. But if somebody else, if I submit it to peer review, which is like the ultimate centralized, finance of science, then someone could steal that, block my paper, I never get it published. They claim discovery of it, right? But if you have proof of actual accomplishment, proof of discovery, whatever you want to call it, that could revolutionize how science is done.
That's huge. Once you timestamp it on the blockchain, that's it.
That's open and verifiable. The next kind of stage in this conversation, I want to just maybe pivot to one last thing revolving, crypto and so forth, and that is, revolves around the three things that are here. One is a piece of gold. This is a bookmark from my first book I'm going to leave with you. So this is gold. This is a meteorite. This is 4.2 billion years old. This is your gift for coming on the Into the Impossible podcast. Cool. So that's 4 billion years old. Now, talk about proof of work, okay?
Yeah.
So for that to occur, you had to have a supernova explode in the local arm of our galaxy, imbuing the local arm that we would later inhabit with dense metals to make a core of the Earth, to crystallize light metals and so forth, to the gravitational field not be too heavy like Jupiter and just have gas and suck up ice, and we can live there. So for us to be here, that thing had to be there, and it is a result of an explosion. Gold comes from the collision of two neutron stars. Talk about proof of work that occurred billions of years ago as well, and then eventually migrated its way to where our Earth would form in the solar system and is in the crust at some level. How do you? And then I have this book, and I have a quest cookie over here, and these are sort of fungible in some sense or another, but to the extent of convincing the ordinary average person, of the value of something that, as you say, is replicatable, is on the content side. When they see this, there's only one of those, and it took a neutron star explode, for that to create it. How do you cause that phase change, to use a physics term, in just ordinary people to say, like, this meta object, which weighs nothing, can be transported. You and I both had Michael Saylor on. He loves to wax rhapsodically about, Bitcoin travels at the speed of, try doing that with gold or whatever. But, how do you convince people of that? When it's not in our nature as human beings, we like scarcity. Our mind thrives on finite games of collecting things like Nobel Prizes and cookies and gold. How do you convince the average person to go against, maybe is that genetic, I guess is what I'm getting to. Is there something visceral in the human being that maybe distrusts the ephemeral, the digital, the meta? Or do you think that's, just a matter of time and maybe I'm a little ossified?
Yeah, I think it is literally only change. So people have a hard time changing. Yeah. So if you have come to value the physical, if you have the amazing frame of reference that you have for explaining this is two neutron stars colliding and that's the only way that we get gold, for you that's so cool that it's like, okay, it's neat that you can do like mathematically sound money with computers, but that doesn't have the romance of the colliding stars.
People love the story, right?
But not everybody has the understanding. When you say neutron stars, like, yo, you know what that means, right? Most people are like, I don't know what that is. That's like, it's esoteric, right?
Yes.
Whereas what they really respond to is just what they grew up with. So if you grew up and your friends are like, oh, did your parents give you any ETH today? Are you using your wallet to, pick up a new skin on Fortnite? It just is. It's, David Foster Wallace, this is water. For them, it will be self-evident that that's just a superior, it is the way that money is handled, right? So the transitional generation is the only generation that we really have to think about.
And so, pains
and so where it starts is, can they generate enough of a use case so that you want it? And so Bitcoin and Ethereum, as of the time of this recording specifically, have done a very good job, because you've got people like me, and trust me, this is not financial advice, do your own research, but when I look at my portfolio and I'm like, guys, I'm making so much money, this is insane, and all I did was listen to somebody who said, Tom, take an amount of money that you're willing to lose and put it in this and just see what happens. I finally did it once I actually understood the technology. And you just see that number going up. Now, it's volatile, so I've also seen it go down. But my thesis is to hold. So
and
I've
not
seen,
to look every day. You talk about Raoul Paul about that, right?
Exactly. And so I've seen a lot more up than I've seen down. And I mean, now it gets into a very complicated question as to why it has so much value with inflation and all of that.
Sure.
But the transitional generation, there will be a fight. And some people will say, this isn't really valuable, and this is dumb, and look at all these people, and you already see that going on right now. But the use case of it gets pretty profound pretty fast. And so people that give it a try, I think the overwhelming number of them, nothing will ever be 100%, but the overwhelming number of people that get in will be rewarded either in just, it's frictionless money.
Yeah.
It's so easy.
Right.
Literally today, I had a vendor that I owed 50 ETH to. It's a lot of money. Now, normally I'd have to fucking call and deal with all the stuff to get the money and get it out and to get all their numbers, and I'm panicking, is this right? And I was literally like, cool, just send me your address and I'll send it to you right now. And so gives me the address, this is the address, yes, that's the address.
PayPal
click,
fees,
and whatever, 90 seconds later, he's got the payment.
Wow.
So it either is better or it isn't in ways that people value, and to the extent that it is better in ways that people value, it will be adopted. Otherwise, it won't be.
I'd love to someday talk to you about how do you steel man versus straw man, different approaches. But in the interest of time, I want to ask you my patented 3 rapid fire questions, all related.
Really fast, I want to give you an answer to that because it's actually really important.
Yeah.
So you have to hunger to know why and where you're wrong. And the only way that people will hunger to know why and where they're wrong is if they care more about their goal than being right. And if they build their self-esteem around finding the right answer rather than being right. If you do that, oh my God, then the world suddenly opens to you. So I am desperate, even though it still hurts. It's embarrassing when I'm wrong and I've said something and somebody's like, that's actually not true. I'm like, oh God. But now I'm like, cool, give it to me. It hurts, it stings, but now I can actually do something.
Like you said before, it's like all growth is, involves some pain or whatever, right? And one way or another. Yeah.
And here's the phrase I want to on my tombstone.
This is going to be, well, let me fold this in. So Arthur C. Clarke, 2001: A Space Odyssey, there are these monoliths that are floating around. They're like time capsules that are going to last 1 billion years. What do you put on your 1 billion year lasting time capsule?
You ready?
Yep, lay it on me.
Skills have utility. I just want people to understand. You learn something because it lets you do something. And so if you protect your ego and you never learn, then you can't do anything. And so your entire life becomes about managing your neurochemistry. Yeah. And you never get to do anything or experiencing anything. But once you're like, I don't value myself for being right. I value myself for identifying the right answer. So I'm more than happy to be wrong. In fact, mistakes and failure are the most information-rich data stream on planet Earth. That's right. So I'm more than happy to do that. And in doing that and learning those lessons, I can now do things other people can't do. And the most fun way to explain that is the most talented athletes on planet Earth were paid millions of dollars to stop Kobe Bryant from putting a ball in a little hoop. And despite that, he got so good that he scored 81 points in a single game.
Against other pros, yeah.
Correct.
Right.
And so it's like, if that doesn't get you excited to go get so good at something that people can't stop you, like they actually can't stop you. Not like I mean that as a theoretical thing. I mean literally, they can't stop you. Like that's
superpower.
Yeah.
No, I call that humble swagger. If you can balance dichotomies of being having appropriate humility but not being cowardly. The Talmud says the easily embarrassed cannot learn. You can't learn if you're easily embarrassed. On the other hand, you can't create greatness unless you have a little bit of swagger. Second thing, so that came from Arthur C. Clarke, the namesake of my Center for Human Imagination at UCSD that I'm co-director of. The other comment that usually comes into play is he said, Arthur C. Clarke said, the only way of determining the limits of the possible is to go beyond them into the impossible. That's the title of my podcast. I want to ask you kind of advice to your former self. What aspect of life perplexed you as a 20-year-old, 30-year-old, whatever, that, could you give advice to that person to give him the courage to do as you've done, to go into the impossible? What would that advice to your former self be?
So the lesson I needed to learn is I was really worried that I wasn't smart enough to be successful. Like that haunted me in a way that no matter how I try to explain it to people, they won't understand. I'm talking almost being paralyzed with just like, did you ever see the movie Amadeus?
Yeah.
All right, so Salieri was a real life contemporary of Mozart, and he laments to God in the movie. And he says, God, why make me just good enough to recognize that I'll never be as good as Mozart? And I was like, somebody sees me. That's what it's like to be me. I feel like I've been made just smart enough to realize I'll never be really smart. Like I'll never be one of the greats. And that really bothered me. And what I ended up learning, which is encapsulated in a quote, and I need to look back up who said this because it's so good. You can't make a racehorse out of a pig, but you can make a really fast pig. And so my life is the answer to the question, what does a really fast pig look like? And so I would have told myself, stop worrying about whether or not you're a racehorse. Just become a fast pig. It's so much better than where you're at now. Right. Like you will die, you'll run out of time long before you run out of potential to realize. So stop worrying about whether you're one of the greatest and just get 1,000 times better.
Right. Yeah, there's a famous story in the Talmud that the famous rabbi goes to heaven and says, I never became like Moses. And God's like, well, Moses didn't get into the promised land, and so you're not getting into your own promised land either. But I didn't want you to be the next Moses. I wanted you to be the best Rabbi Zusha. That was his name. Well, Tom Bilyeu, it's been an honor getting to interview you. You've influenced my life personally, physically, mentally, and I know millions around the world. I just want to thank you for your awesome mission that you've been on. May it continue, as we say, to 120. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you for having me, man. This was so fun.
Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.